Three, two, one. Boom, we're live. So welcome back to another episode or another live view that we're doing today. Today I have the guest, Peter Finnie. A great pleasure to have you joining us. How are you doing today, Peter?
I'm very well, thank you, Tom.
Very exciting to talk about what we're going to go into today. But we're going to be looking at a few things that I remember speaking to your team and speaking with Charlotte and getting this set up. And it really stuck out to me as something I want to do, Peter, because of your experience in these areas and what you're looking at and how AI is changing, and really wanted to get your perspective to share with our audience. But maybe before we go into all of that, maybe just give people who are joining, and for me as well, I know we're having a little conversation beforehand, understanding a bit more about you, but what your kind of story is, Peter, and what's your background and how you got to where you are now and what that kind of route looked like, Peter?
Well, I hope it's quite an interesting background. I was actually training to be an RAF pilot, and in my early 20s became type 1 diabetic, so I had to exit that. Yeah. I had an engineering degree, and I looked up all the various jobs that you could do as an engineer. And right in the back of the guide, it was called a dog guide, degree opportunities for graduates, I found patent attorney. And I thought, that sounds interesting. I don't actually have to build or make anything myself, because I wasn't that great an engineer. But I help others get protection for their inventions and develop an intellectual property position for them. And 30 years later, I'm on the board at Potter Clarkson. I'm head of our MedTech and Digital Health group. I write extensively on AI-related issues because it's becoming increasingly popular across a broad range of technologies, not just computer science, but into pharma and elsewhere. And so I've just been moving in that direction. It's a funny thing to say, I specialize in working with startups. Nice. Normally, that's sort of not something someone says, oh, I like to work for Apple, I like to work for Microsoft. No, I like working for startups. I like working for tech startups where they've got their technology, they're seeking funding, they're seeking investment, and they've got to protect their position, looking ahead to an exit through various fundraisers along that route. And it's a very exciting and interesting group to be working with.
Yeah, I think so. Was there something that initially drew you to that, or over the bigger companies, or with what startups? I see startups as like we know people that literally just move from startup to startup because it's so much fun. Like you get to see a lot more bigger challenges, and you see companies really shaping certain industries or shaping certain decisions.
You see a much broader range of things. I tell you how I got into it. I was asked out of the blue because somebody said I was an expert in something to do with some area of photonics, and I was asked by an investor to do some due diligence. I'd never done that form of investor-led due diligence before on a startup, although I'd worked for a few startups. And as I learned how to do that, I realised how would my own startups fare if someone like me were to do the due diligence exercise that is expected of them when they meet investors. And so I sort of flipped it around. We played both sides of that coin, helping entrepreneurs get themselves ready and investment ready, and helping investors see through all the mist around IP and understand where IP is adding value. And once you're into that world, that system, you get recommended, you end up going to all the right events, and it is an expertise. It's one thing to be a patent attorney and write a decent patent application, to be able to actually help people with their businesses and their commercial decisions, particularly in areas like AI, where there are lots of other hurdles, like regulatory hurdles, for example, around software as a medical device. And you have a very broad range. It's fascinating. It's a great job.
Yeah, I love it. Have you seen many changes, or what? Of course, you're going to see many changes, but what are the big changes you've seen since going into being a patent attorney and patent and all around this area? What have you seen mainly as things have shifted? I mean, the pandemic, for one, shifted a lot of things towards digitization, towards AI, towards cloud, towards migrating digital transformation. Have you seen any
digital and cloud-based technologies? And across various technologies. So patent attorney firms are traditionally set up. We have a department that deals with IT and engineering. We have another lot that deal with chemistry. We have another lot that deal with biochemistry. We have our trademark attorneys. And they're all segmented according to their technical backgrounds, what degree you read. That's not how technology companies work anymore. It looks like a biotech company, but it's embracing a whole load of digital components, whether that's AI, machine learning, or even blockchain. And suddenly you're having to work as a different group. The team that you need around you is not one person who's got a background in engineering and graduated 30 years ago with a couple of helpers. You're now having to work as a multidisciplinary team because the technology is converged. They're not just sitting in their little pots.
Yeah.
So that has been a big difference. Of late, I've certainly seen huge amounts of digital. And of course, digital is a computer implemented invention type, and that has traditionally faced a number of problems in terms of getting protection. So the world is going in a direction where patent law, which was our law, was written came enacted in 1977. Do you think anybody who wrote the law in 1977 could see what 2020 would look like, 2022?
Mad,
And that's one of the, we'll talk about it later, some of the tensions that come from trying to interpret law written long before anybody could have conceived the way digital and AI and so on would be used across a range of different technologies.
Yeah, that's crazy, Peter. I remember I was saying to my dad runs a business, and other people that I spoke to, I was like, how did you do business back in the 1970s and 80s? Like, how did you keep track of everything? Like, I would, if I had to go back, obviously it's the way of doing things, and it seems like a doddle now to them. They're like, oh my God, I can send a newsletter to all these people so quickly, and whatever that we take for granted as younger marketers. But that whole kind of shift to think, now you need to do all of this, and now you need to have it all patented, and with the future coming, Peter, maybe with Web 3.0 and the metaverse, this one area, these areas get missed. Like, how do you patent that? How do you make sure it's legal? How do you make sure the regulations in place? What do you take on it all exploding?
Well, it's incredibly challenging. If you think about just pick that one, the metaverse. So the metaverse, you're in there on your virtual reality headset, and you're walking down these shops, and you walk into a shop, and it's got a lot of Nike stuff and whatever. Trademark law. Just imagine the trademark issues with all the brands that get thrown into these metaverse environments, and the challenges for law that was based on printed subject matter, maybe a website, adverts on TV, and suddenly now you're in a metaverse virtual environment. Where does it stand in terms of trademark law and how you protect your brands in those environments? What opportunities does it create for third parties to come in and really shake stuff up?
Yeah.
And you know, when we will talk, I'm sure, later about pharma and how it's embraced digital. Actually, I see a lot of money at the moment. It's not going into pharma. Investment doesn't go into pharma in that sense that, you know, the big pharma companies don't go out for venture capital.
Yeah.
What's happening, though, is these tech companies are doing pharma using AI.
Yeah.
And they're attracting tech money. And tech money, there's quite a lot of it sloshing around at the moment. And they're investing in tech companies that can then move themselves into the value chain of pharma, where there's an awful lot more money than selling a few apps online a month.
Yeah. I almost think it shouldn't be allowed. Like, who was it? It was Amazon that bought the healthcare company, and just looking at it now. One Medical signed agreement for $18 a share, which is valued at approximately nearly $4 billion. That's incredible. Like, Amazon starting as a bookshop is now running a massive £1 billion pharmaceutical company, or whatever they do.
You know, it's all about data, isn't it now? And AI in particular feeds on data. It needs to consume data. And one of the changes that came up in June this year, the UK IPO issued its report, and it wasn't that interesting particularly. It confirmed that, you know, we continue to protect copyright works generated by computers for life of the author plus 50 years, and the author is deemed to be the person who, you know, put the arrangements in place to generate the work. You know, they've continued with that. They've decided for the time being they're not happy with the idea of an AI entity as an inventor. But importantly, and I think it's the only change that really matters, is to create an exception that allows companies, people, individuals, provided it's legally available, to actually mine other people's data.
Wow.
If you think about the NHS database, that's a hugely, you know, populated database, lots of deep data in there. You can figure out lots of stuff if you've got access to it, but you don't want to end up being sued afterwards for inappropriately accessing information or deriving benefit from it that wasn't licensed. So I think that is a positive change. Government's recognizing you can't give big companies complete dominance and control over data. Otherwise, you'll get this poverty of innovation, not just between countries, but within countries.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I sit on the board for a company called Alpha Lake, and Ollie, who runs it, they're a great team there. And the kind of areas that open my eyes up to, Peter, like you're just touching on, of how they were doing it, and everything from like where the data centers are placed to be able to use that data, but also, as you said, that lack of innovation, but also how do you use it and how many things you could get hold of and how many models you could create. And it's really important to look at that. One thing that jumped to my head, Peter, was, and I will get it kind of segues into the question I'll ask you around recent AI and IP regulation. Watched a great film last night. And to anyone watching, Mike's already asked a brilliant question for you later, Peter. But from anyone watching, there's a film called Worth, and it's got Michael Keaton in it, and it's on Netflix. You can watch it if you're on Netflix subscription, and it's around the obviously very sad point of when 9/11 happened. And they had to figure out how much compensation they'd give to each people, and obviously you've got a janitor and a CEO in the same building, and they were looking at it from like a data perspective of, well, how do you, and it basically said, how do we regulate this? What the laws are to say who gets certain payouts? Like how do we measure each individual case? And I think segueing in, I thought it opened my eyes to, well, a lot of regulation came out of that, and a lot of regulation comes out of more and more things that are happening today, and especially as everyone moved to digital, there are a lot of regulations that came out that thought, oh, we never stored our data that way, we never did our data that way. What are your areas? Because this is something I'm not massively clued up with, Peter, to be completely transparent. I was on the panel with UK Civil Service and the UK Ministry of Defence at the AI Summit, and they were talking around it. What's your kind of thinking on the recent AI and IP regulation that's coming in, or planned to come in, or has come in?
Well, I think there's one element of it, which is the law, as I said earlier, is slow to catch up. So, for example, and you can understand why in healthcare, where AI is used directly in the clinical decision making, who's going to trust that? When you were telling your story about 9/11, I can think of a much earlier story. There's apparently an algorithm in America for determining sentencing. And it turns out that basically if you're black, you go to prison longer because the computer predicts these things. It's total bogus stuff, but it's biased, it's prejudiced, and that biasing comes from how it's been trained. And so regulation is there at some level to make sure that doesn't go wrong. And in healthcare, you get the wrong patient sets, the drug won't necessarily respond in the way that you might with another patient set. That's dangerous. When it comes to working out things like this is outside IP, but just talking generally, your insurance risks using AI. Why would we trust the AI model to be accurate? It's been trained on a certain set of data. How has it been validated? AI used to detect breast cancer these days, there's not enough images, so they can make fake images and train it on those. So there's an awful lot in the background to make AI work, and the governments are struggling. Medical software as a medical device is an area, particularly in America. They have started to license these sorts of things, but they're very wary of change. And of course, software is always being updated. AI can be fixed in terms of what its behavior is after a while, or it can continue to learn. Well, if it's continuing to learn, how do you regulate that? Because you don't know how it works.
Yeah. That's why I always think about regulation, Peter. I'm like, how do you regulate something that hasn't been invented yet? Like, it's a tricky, and that's what I said on the panel. I was just like, I don't see, like, you're always going to be in a bit of a situation, as a personal opinion. But yeah, as you were saying.
But it's everywhere around us. People using AI on data. Some of it is our data to create value for that company. There's supposedly knock-on benefits for everybody else. What's it called now? There's something like restorative justice or something like that. Somebody told me, right? And it's basically we allow all our data to go out there, and other people mine it to create value, and then they kind of tax us for having learned from it. So there's an ethical element to do it. It's about this equitable, it's our data. A lot of this is our data, and it's being used by others to train AI algorithms and so on. And we do benefit from it, but we do rather give it away for free. And we're not quite sure how they're using it. And GDPR sits in the background, of course, for all of that. But when we come to innovation, when we come particularly around AI, I categorize it, and not everyone will necessarily agree, into three types. There's one which is AI implemented innovation, and you can think of driverless cars. A computer with a machine learning platform is driving your car. The invention is in the software.
Got you.
And then there's AI assisted innovation, where you use an AI platform to help you come up with a new invention. Drug repurposing is a good example of that. You take a massive data set, you look at the kinetics of a particular disease, and you train it, and it tells you that, let's make up a drug, aspirin is going to cure elbow rot. I don't know whether that's a real disease, but and then what you do is you file a patent application for the use of aspirin to cure elbow rot. And that's AI assisted, where you have used a machine to help as a tool to help you reveal patterns in data that you'd never see as an individual. And the final one, which has been the subject of all of these cases recently, is what we call AI generated, where somebody will say, and they have in the case of what's called the Dabus decisions, I'll come back to that in a moment, they say, oh, the machine did it all on their own. Well, I think there's a lot of people quite skeptical as to whether a machine really did invent it on its own and whether that's really what happened. But nevertheless, that was the way the case was presented. But that's the sort of long-term future with AI, where are these things just going to invent them on their own? And we as humans, how do we reward people's investment in that? Is it right to grant patents for people who use computers? It was like TV program. The computer says yes. The computer told you the answer. Why would I give you a 20-year monopoly for using a computer to come up with the answers? But it's not as simple as that, particularly when you take the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, pharmaceutical is wild, isn't it? There's another series like a whole scandal. What was it around that whole drug that came out in the US, and they were like
Oxycontin.
And it's had a series built around it, Dope Sick, which I thought was incredible.
Yeah, I saw that. We've just watched that. My wife and I have just finished watching that. It was fantastic. Michael Keaton was in it, but it was also frightening. Particularly frightening how the FDA, who are the gatekeepers to all of this, the referees, that somehow or other they allowed the data to be skewed to get the label changed so that it sounded safer.
It's wild, isn't it? That just shows you how much it can be messed with for a whole national, there's 240 million people in the US or whatever, to get it to that level, to that extent, to think, okay, well, we can just slightly change this to suit your needs. Wow.
But you imagine if you put AI on the problem and you trained it, not necessarily maliciously, but trained it inappropriately, it would then become a self-justifying circle of, the computer says yes, it must be safe. Well, who trained the computer? Rubbish in, rubbish out.
Was there doing it? And that's why I always think there's biased things. You see it around the property sector. There was a massive case. I think the New York Times reported it. I think it was them that reported it around New York flats and houses being sold, and they weren't giving any people to people of certain ethnicity or certain backgrounds. And it happened with CVs as well. Amazon got found out. They didn't hire one single woman trying to use this. And it's just crazy to think how biased it is. And that's for people that are overqualified for a very basic job.
I believe in America, they do a lot of their voter canvassing based on AI to kind of work out where to focus their efforts, and they will inherently classify people in ways that would not be tolerated if it was written down.
Do you mean doing the campaigning and pouring money?
And presidential campaigns, congressional sort of votes and so on. They will go out to neighborhoods and they will work out where to go to and what to say to them using AI. So it's not exactly intellectual property, but never. I'm just expressing my view that you can see that it's a very powerful platform, but capable of being abused, and that's why you have the regulatory authorities. And when you come to see things like Dope Sick, you think, well, the regulatory authorities didn't really hold their end up of the bargain there, protecting the public, did they?
Yeah. Bite of the ass as soon as you see how much the lawsuits are coming at them and everything, and how much it can have an impact further down the line if you don't deal with it head on.
Dope Sick is actually a good one because that's obviously opioid use disorder, and you can now, there's a complete lack of clinicians in America to be able to cope with the flood of people with that form of addiction. So you classically go and have cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's a science, data-driven approach to how they do that. You can now make that deliverable using AI.
That's cool.
And one of the tricks to using AI is to make it feel more like a human is behind it. And AI is able to detect your kind of moods from your responses and adapt the delivery of that digital therapeutic so that you maintain whatever other drug you're on to keep you off the cravings and so on, and take you through to hopefully being free of all drugs. It may take years, of course, but AI is a great sort of opportunity there because there aren't enough people.
Yeah, not enough people, and AI can kind of decide it and look at the different models, and that's what I love about AI. That's what I love about machine learning. It just continually gets better and better, providing that you're inputting the right data, and it can continually learn new ideas for innovation and all these ideas and what it can do, and especially around voice as well. Voice in the healthcare industry is getting fucking massive, Peter. Like,
yeah.
I think someone, Intelligent Voice, the CEO of it, he was telling me and it's the episode before this, if anyone wants to listen to it, it was wild, the things I was hearing about how they're using synthesis and how they're understanding, like, how to help, like, 999 calls, how to help the emergency departments. Just blew me away.
So here's my big beef about all of this is you and I will, with our technical backgrounds, will look at this and go, this is inherently technical. Yeah. You could not get much more technical than this. AI platforms, machine learning, and so on. Yeah. Big data problems. But when you start to fuse it with human related elements like cognitive behavioral therapy, biofeedback, and so on, the Patent Office applying law written best part of 50 years ago, and maybe my maths is out there, 45 years ago anyway, it thinks this is just a mental act. This is just a method of doing business. There's no technical process going on here. Well, hang on a second, just look at the team. This isn't a fortune teller looking at a crystal ball. This is a machine looking at data, looking for patterns in data, trained in a certain way. The outputs sometimes need to be interpreted by a human to make sense of them. But I don't think you can get much more technical than that. But the Patent Office, based on law, let's say 45 years ago, case law, we will operate here, as do the Americans, under the law of precedent. So you might be bound by a case from the House of Lords, as it was then, Supreme Court now, from 10, 15 years ago. I'm sorry, technology's moved on a little bit since then, chaps. And
back up to the fight, can you? Just like, what is it?
And you're there as a startup getting 5, 10, 15 million pounds worth of investment. And the Patent Office say, your stuff, that's not real technology. So long as it's got a valve and a circuit and some electricity and somebody powering it, that's okay. But if you're using a computer and you're using machine learning to analyze data, particularly if you're then using that to help people, let's say, maintain their drug therapies, that's just a mental act. That's just recreating what a human does. Yeah. Well, no shit, Sherlock. That's a little bit more complicated than that. Yeah.
It's a bit more tricky. I'd like to touch into that then, Peter, because you got that's a really good point that I didn't even think about. And this is an area, like, as I was saying, it's why I really wanted to get you on. Do you think then, from your view and what you're seeing, either from personal view or Potter Clarkson's view, or are the government, UK government, to bring it back to where we're from, are they missing something? Are they missing an opportunity for AI-driven inventions? Is there something that they could be focusing on or bringing forward? Like, where does this potential lie, Peter, for new innovations and technologies, and how much the government get involved? Because I see it, this might be a very obnoxious view, and I've got a lot to learn. I speak to the government at events, and I think, you're not technologists. How are you going to put a patent around something you don't maybe understand? Like, this has taken them years to develop, and it's so complex, and the algorithm might be really complex. The outcomes, like, look at VR. VR is basically like creating infinite worlds. What do you think to that? Are they missing an opportunity to recognize all this? Or?
First of all, I mean, there are some great people in government. I can't remember the name of the minister who resigned, who was in charge of technology. He was absolutely superb. The Patent Office have got some really great technology people and great policy civil servants behind there. I think part of the problem is a bit like when you talk about tax. Britain would like to do all this on tax, but it won't work unless everybody else does it as well. Yeah. And that's the thing about IP. For it to really work, it has to be harmonized. But sometimes I do feel that, someone's got to go first. And there is an opportunity at the moment for the UK to go first. Yeah. This I mentioned earlier on, this Dabus decision, which was a deliberately provocative case. My friend Ryan Abbott, Professor Ryan Abbott, was one of the advocates on it, and I really admire what the team did. But what they did was they filed a patent application, and they didn't name an inventor as human inventor. They named a machine. Yeah, and they were pushing the boundaries of, can I get a patent, please, sir? It was a machine that invented it. Mm-hmm. And the Patent Office basically said, we can't have machines being named as inventors. Mm. And even if they were an inventor, the whole principle of patents is property, and you have to own it. And how did you get an assignment from this non-sentient being? Yeah. So they put forward
how did you do that?
19th century concepts up against the 21st century innovation. And it was a provocative case. I don't think it was the best case because, it was a food container. If it had been cancer curing drug, it would have got far more attention. So you're not going to let them protect that because a machine did it. Yeah. Is that what you're saying? There was an opportunity because it deals with fundamentally, do we really care who the inventor is and why? Yeah. And if somebody says, I used a machine for this, and it was at least part of it. Remember that fits within two of my categories. It's probably computer assisted.
Yeah.
Arguably, it might have been computer generated, but most innovations I see are computer assisted. So there is a human either doing the programming or doing the training, or there's somebody at the other end selecting from the outputs.
Yeah.
You might have to test 2,000 drugs to get one that might work, and then it fails in trials. So if you can get a computer to minimize that time and wasted, that's a good thing to be able to protect. And I think the problem with the decision, not just the court decision, but the government's decision to not pursue that angle and try and be a world first and say, let's be a bit more open to these things, let's embrace the 21st century, is that we could have set the standard. And like we could in tax at some point. Who are we waiting for that's going to lead on this, if not us? We have a brilliant industry, software industry over here, a huge venture capital and private and angel-based network of entrepreneurs that are out there. It's something you don't see in some countries where there's this huge technology focus and entrepreneurialism backed with private money.
Yeah.
And you asked at the beginning of the interview, well, where's the future? It's digital. Yeah. Okay, digital is going to embrace AI. AI is going to be used to help you invent, and we're not yet ready to talk about it.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, fantastic. So no change there. Thanks very much. So it is a lost opportunity. I can't quantify what's been lost.
Yeah.
Because I think the vast majority of cases at the moment wouldn't suffer from it not being done. And I think that's why they chose the easy option.
Yeah.
But by the time it's not the easy option, it could take years to change the law. And that's where the missed opportunity. Yeah. Start thinking about the law changes now. Advocate on the international circuit for change, make small changes in your own domestic environment without affecting your international obligations, and you can start setting the path and encourage innovation in that space.
Yeah, you've changed my mind a bit, Peter. You have changed, because when I look at this, and I always try and play devil's advocate to a degree, and I know there's great tech people in the government and they're brilliant, but I always think at the same time you can point out some things, but if you look at it from, because I always think, like, how much does regulation hinder innovation? Because if you put restraints on certain companies or certain technologies, is that going to affect a founder coming up and thinking, well, I might as well not even try? Like, if that's going to be, I don't know. I always play with the idea, like, how much does it mess with a startup idea?
It's a big philosophical question. In the pharma industry, pharma doesn't operate without patents. In fact, they won't do the research if they don't think they get a patent. You want to know why there's no more antibiotics? No money in it.
Really?
Not enough money in it.
How does that work?
Just to do with the way they get remunerated, the existing drugs operate. So there's a definite shortage in novel antibiotics, given our immunity to these things, or the viruses developing immunity and certain strains and things like that. But there's not enough money in it for pharma to pull its thumb out. If you've got Fragile X disease, well, that's X% of the population. Who's going to bother inventing a drug for that? So in the pharma industry, though, patents are absolutely essential. And then you go to something else like mobile phones, and you think, well, is that essential? I mean, most of the cost of a mobile phone is dealt with in patents, royalties, and so on, licensing, and part of the standard essential patents. Yeah. So, but look how many mobile phones there are out there. So, patents, there's not a lot of evidence that patents stifle innovation, because in some of the most innovative areas of our technology, communications, there are hundreds of thousands of patents. It makes up the vast majority of the cost of a mobile telephone. Yeah. And yet the consumer choice is huge.
Yeah.
The regulation point of it at the moment, I suppose you could say patents are regulation. I see the regulation is really about when you come to the use of AI in things like clinical decision making, or driverless cars, or autonomous aircraft, where there's safety elements and there's a natural hesitancy to say, I don't think I'm going to allow that. So IP, in that sense, the patent system is supposed to encourage innovation and investment. Yeah. So in that sense, if the trend is all towards digital and embracing machine learning and so on, why is the patent system making that difficult? Yeah. There are some people who say, oh, well, if we allow machines to file patents and so on, it will be flooded with patents. There's no evidence of that at the moment. As I say, at the moment, all the ones I see, it's computer assisted, and it's a tool. Yeah. But I think people would like to know that that using that tool doesn't in any way affect their ability to get a patent. Yeah. One of the things about inventions is this idea of concept. It's an inventive concept. You conceive of an invention, but when you program a computer and it spits out an answer, this drug here, try that for cancer, Are you really the inventor?
Yeah.
Or are you a bit like the person who let the AI button go on, it developed this lovely looking picture of which you had no idea what it was going to do?
Yeah.
And there are somebody in litigation will test these concepts, and they'll test it long before the law is ready to change. And I think that's the missed opportunity. So that's a very long answer to your.
I loved it.
It's quite a simple question.
You give me a lot of things because I just looked it up. There's 15 billion phones in the world at the moment, up from just over 14 billion. This is 2021, so 15 billion in the world for around 2021. But it reminded me of how important it is with pharmaceuticals, Peter. Were you aware of the company called Theranos and what they did with blood testing and how they Elizabeth Holmes and I mean, they sold
till you make it, I think is the expression I learned from that.
Like, the book's crazy. Like, I read the book and by the New York Times journalist for his name, but that was a brilliant book. And then I watched a series on Apple, and the series was pretty good as well. But it just baffled me, like all these big deals with Walgreens, was it? And they had them like going out, and you think none of it was ever regulated or there was no patents involved. It was just like, we've got some.
Oh no, there were. Sorry, Tom. There were loads of patents involved.
Yeah, there were patents. They never got checked. Yeah, that was it. They never got fact checked until they got.
No, what they did was they used the patents to bully and control their staff. They used patents and trade secrets to control the messaging around the efficacy of the machinery and the tests. And that's I'm not here to promote the IP industry, but if you want to see how IP used badly in an anti-competitive way, that was it. They used trade secrets in particular and some patents, and in misnaming people on patents to control information and control people and how they, and their employment position and their reputation. It was outrageous, and bottom line is it didn't work. But for the vast majority of the patents they filed, you didn't have to prove it worked in the patent application. If you file a patent for a drug saying it's going to cure cancer, you have to have data. Without that data, they won't get you to do a patent. But patents for machines that do blood analysis, they just got patents left, right, and centre for it without any data, which is good, because if they'd had to, well, bad. If they had to, somebody might have gone, hang on, I'm not giving you a patent for that. It doesn't work. You've got no evidence it works.
Yeah. That's wild, isn't it? How they got a patent or however it was. I just remember it was my mistake. So I was getting it mixed up with when they eventually got fact checked on it, and they were like, "We're entering your lab. If not, we're shutting you down because we need to prove that this is what you're saying." It was all a big hoax. It was just like, you just told people, and it's like, how do you even get a patent for that? Like, how does that even work? If you need that data, how do you get around a situation like that, Peter?
If I was to take
like anything that happens, like, how do you do that?
If I was to take something positive out of that story, it's a reminder for everybody, and let's say for more altruistic reasons, to develop the company and attract funding, is having an IP strategy in order to attract funding and underpin the value in the company. They did at least try to do that bit. And that's what we do when we do due diligence. We come in on these entrepreneurs, these startups, and we look at their IP strategy. Some of them don't have it. If they're in software, I'll offend some people listening. They say, I don't really believe in patents for software. It's not a religion. It's not a religion. It's not what you believe in. It's what the person that you want to buy you believes in. And if they're finding loads of patents, it'll behove you to say, I don't believe in this. Because when you come to exit, your value will be judged accordingly. Now, not in every case. I'm not saying, because trade secrets are equally important. Branding, particularly in consumer-led business, can be important. But if you're in a software space using AI, you have to think about it. I'll digress for 1 minute. There is a problem with protecting AI implemented inventions because you have to disclose so much of how it works and how it's trained. And that is a big barrier to getting meaningful protection, because you end up writing very long patent applications, giving away quite a lot of trade secrets just to get some meaningful protection. And so it is something that is another barrier.
I heard as well, Peter, is this right? Is this correct? That if you write a patent, someone I was speaking to at AI Summit said, maybe it's CogX, I'm sure it was AI Summit, and they were saying that they wrote patents and they sold their company for a very large amount. And they were saying when you write a patent, you have to do it all as like one sentence, is it, or something? Like you have to write it out, and it's all. And they said it can get very confusing because you're writing about quite high-tech stuff.
I know what they're talking about. So no, a patent is not one sentence. A patent has a detailed description. I call it a cookbook recipe. So a cookbook recipe has a picture of the cake, set of ingredients, and a set of instructions. And a patent, in many ways, structured in the same way. The thing you're talking about is these things called claims. Claims define the legal protection. And for some reason, and I must have read it once, I can't remember, The format is that each claim is one sentence. You can't have multiple sentences. So it's a wheel having a rubber tire, comma, a central hub, comma, a tread pattern on the tire, comma, and a so and so, full stop. You can't just build up a paragraph of stuff, and it makes you stop and think. One of the things we do for patent attorneys is we ask them, for example, to describe a pair of scissors. And we get them to write down. It's got try and do it once, and it's. You wouldn't think it would be that hard, but people with PhDs and first class degrees often completely screw it up, and they can't. But after 10 years of training as a patent attorney, you talk about opposable blades where the point of shear moves along the length of the blade as one blade is moved relative to the other. We're not interested in the pivot, not interested in plastic handles. It's the point of shear moves up the blade, and you're trained to do that, but you have to do it in one sentence.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good.
Which is not easy with AI. Which is not easy with AI.
Reminds me when I was in marketing, and I'd always say, if you want to find someone that's good at copywriting, tell them to write an ad within 5 words. I was like, that'll soon show you what their use of words are. Like, it will soon pick out how good they can be and how to the point they can be.
We quite often use copywriters, although I'd say I write and speak for a living. We often use copywriters because by the time you've written these patents for 20 years, I can't even write to my mother without going, dear mum, comma, new line. Please find enclosed in triplicate copies of photographs of your grandchildren, full stop, new paragraph. And you just can't do it. It just comes across as very, very fine. So we have copywriters help us sometimes just to make it approachable.
Yeah, have it coming across or having it coming out when you're at a dinner party, just like, hello, new line, what am I on about? Cut out of it. No, that's a really good point. So maybe from your point, Peter, and from one thing we've got loads of questions coming in as well. People seem to be loving this conversation. A lot of people saying it's very interesting. A lot of people questioning between themselves as well, which we can have a look at as well, Peter. But taking it back, so I really want to learn about this from maybe the life sciences. So maybe not just pharmaceuticals, maybe not just national health line or whatever area you want to, just life sciences, whatever way you want to angle this, Peter. And if you've got any examples, that'd be great. What kind of challenge? I hate using the word challenges. I'd say what kind of opportunities do they have, but do they need to think about when protecting discoveries? Because we were talking about it right there. But as you're saying, startups like me, I rush into things and I sometimes have very arrogant views. So I'm like, no, it needs to go this way, and we don't properly think through it. And it's a great lesson to learn. But what do you think? What are the challenges that they're facing, or what challenges do they face to get to the opportunities? Do you see?
I think, again, it's helpful when you talk about innovation is to segment them into one of those 3 categories. And let's just say there's 2, computer implemented and computer assisted. So AI assisted, AI implemented. AI implemented inventions in health tech, in life sciences generally, is in principle no different from in the physical sciences or engineering. You're using AI to carry out some tasks. Yeah. And if you want to get a patent, that's a process that's being carried out. So it's a set of method steps that are carried out by the computer using AI. Yeah. You protect it in the same way as you would any other invention. But the difficulty is in disclosing enough information about the AI engine, how it's been trained and how it operates, to be able to meet the requirements for disclosure, that enabling cookbook recipe. Yeah. You can't put the code in there. So there's always this thing, I'd like to patent it, but I'd have to give away an awful lot of information to be able to cover the method that I use. And what you can't get, I've seen patents written this way, that a method of detecting how well you've used your toothbrush by monitoring certain sensors and using AI. That is not patentable. You can't just get away with that. I mean, it is patentable in principle, but not at that level. I'm using AI to solve a problem. That's what AI is for. So there are elements of that. So you might have an AI implemented invention, but you may be best to keep it secret. And you'll have to deal with your investors who might be patent crazy and say, we must have a patent. No, that would damage us to have a patent. Yeah. Where it's AI assisted innovation, in many ways, you're not interested in how the machine helped you come up with the idea. You don't even necessarily have to disclose that the machine helped you come up with the idea. If you have a platform that you feed in some details to do with a rare disease, and it suggests 5 known drugs or combination of drugs as possibly being the ones that might help, and it's done that using an AI platform looking at data, and it's been specifically trained, you might find a drug that no one would have thought would have worked on that condition. You don't patent the way in which you discovered that drug. You patent the drug itself. The issue that comes up there is all you've got to base your patent filing on is in silico data. The computer told me. And guess what? As I said earlier on, that's not good enough. You have to have done some lab testing. That creates an issue in life sciences because a lot of life sciences, as I said earlier on, are now being driven by tech companies. They're not people in white coats, injecting things into poor animals. They are doing stuff on a computer. And to go to the next level and get some animals and get some petri dishes or whatever and prove that it actually works, that costs quite a bit of money, or it can do. So you think you're an AI startup in life sciences, developing new drugs, new approaches to developing enzymes or whatever it might be. If you need data to support that it actually works, you may have to partner with somebody else, or risk filing it without data and the consequences later. So, but I think for me, although my background is in engineering and IT, the most interesting thing that's being done with AI from a computer-assisted point of view at the moment is largely in the pharma space and biotech. And as I say, it's either big pharma suddenly opening up departments to do this work that they didn't previously have, or they're going out to partner with tech companies, or you've got the tech companies that we like acting for, seeking private equity investment to get them to the point where pharma will get into bed with them.
And take that deal on and plow money into
that deal on. But you have to get your IP position sorted out from the beginning. What sort of innovation have I got here? What's the best way of protecting it, and when? Timing is everything.
That's a great answer.
Data.
That's great. And how do you see it then? Because it's reminded me when you were saying that something that stuck out in that conversation is sometimes these companies, these startups, I see it all the time, the amount of investment is sky high at the moment. There was more investment in 2021 than there was in 2020, despite the pandemic. Like it's still just rocketing.
I saw that number of new patent filings for entrepreneurs we filed. It was going crazy at one point.
Wow, like going up. How do you deal with that relation? Is that a problem, or is it something that happens, like the relationship between the investors and the business owner saying, well, because look at Dragon's Den. There's a lot of times when they come on, they say, have you patented it? And sometimes they have, and sometimes they hand it to Deborah Meaden, and Deborah Meaden's like, this isn't a patent. Like, I'm not investing. Like, this is nothing. Like, how do you deal with that?
I've had clients go on Dragon's Den, one in particular who I did it with last night. Actually, he was successful until they came to post-investment due diligence, and they weren't happy that he had more of a control over the umbrella IP, we'll call it, than they were comfortable with. And so IP can make these deals fall through. But I also get quite annoyed with the Dragons. They say, we formed a company 12 months ago, and then somebody shouts out, do you have a patent? Well, how long do you think it takes to get a patent?
Take a while.
And after all your years of investment, do you not know that the chance of having a patent within 12 months is pretty slim? You can actually, but you have to push really hard. But they ask these questions. And so... I work with lots of investors. I'll name one, an early bird. They are really, really good because they've understood where IP fits in the business plan, and they do a very tailored form of due diligence, which is actually quite supporting. They're not going in there to nail the companies to the mast and then use it to leverage price. It's part of their due diligence where post-investment, they want to see perhaps some changes, more professionalization of how people deal with their IP. But there is sometimes a bit of a tension. If somebody has a model that says we want to see patents to protect this, and your model is to use trade secrets, you have to have a convincing story as to why you've done that and not file patents. Because otherwise, it looks lazy.
I
didn't have any money. I couldn't be bothered. Or as I said earlier, I don't believe in patents. But you believe in my 5 million so that I can help you develop something that someone else can copy. Your belief system isn't quite aligned with mine.
It's not like need something there.
I jest, but that's the sort of thing. And you do meet people sometimes. Oh, I don't think we've invented anything patentable. Well, it's a legal test. It's not a judgment call that you say, and you can't be objective because you're the inventor and by definition smarter than the legal character that is assessed against. So we've done things with innovation capture sessions with people, IP audits, where we sit down and we stress test. When they say, I don't think we're inventing anything special here. Well, that's not the sort of thing you're saying to the investor, is it? Let's have a look down and drill down into the weeds of your innovation. And there it is. Lovely little patentable concept, maybe some trade secrets sitting alongside it. Let's work out a plan. And although it'll take us a while to implement it and some money, and the timing is all important about that as well, but then we've got something to say to people. And so it's, you just have to be aware of what sort of investor you're going to, what they're expecting, and be due diligence ready.
And know that they know like the one that you mentioned, making sure that they understand where it fits in, to not have it fly back on you later down the line. Just say, as you were saying, patent the fact that I've used my toothbrush this many times a day or whatever. Like, but that's not. That's that, using that as an example.
No, it's and as I say, software and AI implemented innovation does have its own particular difficulties because it is a computer implement. The Patent Act, actually from 1977, says you can't patent technology that relates to certain things, methods of doing business, mental acts, and computer software. And it's got this little rider that says unless it, only so far as it relates to that thing as such. So we've had 45 years House of Lords decisions just to work out the impact of that word as such. So you can patent software, you can patent you can protect methods of doing business and so on, provided it meets this test of technicality and technical contribution. But the whole problem is that back in 1977, they thought the best way of protecting software was just through copyright. Whereas now, so much innovation, what we would think of as classical innovation, is done using software, that it's a bit of an old bit of law and it needs changing. And that's the other thing the UK government could do, is just start to look at whether or not the Patents Act is still fit for purpose. It all has to be balanced, because this is a tax on people. Having patents at some level could be considered to be a tax on you. Your vacuum cleaner costs a bit more because it's got 20 patents and no one else can make the same thing. Guess what? I can charge a premium for that because I haven't got any competition. So it's a bit of a tax. But without that innovation, you wouldn't have that vacuum cleaner. And you just have to expand that model out. And there will be people out there who will fundamentally disagree with every word I just said. But they hate patents. They hate patents. They don't believe in intellectual property.
No, that's regardless of whether people agree or disagree. That's why I love the AI journal, because people can come on and it's not written from us. It's, you can have two different ideas, which I think is great, Peter. And it's regardless, it gives people to. I always love it, because when I deal with people, and you might see this, especially doctors or people that are in the health professional field, they always, and scientists, they never really look at something because that's right and wrong. They always look at it, and maybe it's just everyone I've met so far, but usually in like science papers, they always look at why. They're never like, well, this is right, that's wrong, I can categorize it. They're just like, why? They're just constantly pushing to figure out why does it work like that, or why did that one work instead of that one. That's not to say the other one can't be used somewhere else, and it's not to say, well, that's wrong. It's such a cool mindset. I love it. Like, I think if more people had that mindset towards business and towards social interactions, maybe we'd get along a bit better. But
it reminds me, you talking there about the professional exams to become a patent attorney. Patent attorneys generally, first class degrees from top universities, PhDs. Not the most diverse profession, it has to be said. Says he, white, male, 50s. But the exams, I love the exams, because the exams are it's like a pig in shit. There's no answer. In a world where there's no answer, there's just a lot of issues to be resolved and approaches to be taken. I excelled at that. People who were far cleverer than me just looked at me, they wanted to say yes or no. There is no yes or no. And that's why, again, look at some of the broad stuff we talked about earlier on. There's no right answer. It's not right to patent everything. It's not right to just give up on it all. It's not right to just rely on trade secrets. There's no right, but you can kind of work it out, given your business plan, the direction of travel you've got, the sort of investor, and ultimately, if you're seeking an exit for you and your investors, then what does the buyer want to see? And I love working in that environment where there isn't a prescription you just write out. People walk in in the room and you go, I know what you need. Do that.
Just can slap it straight away, know what they want to do.
I've seen your type so many times. Do this.
This is exactly what I've got the recipe for you, as you were saying. I've got the cookbook idea for you. You need to follow this recipe, do this. So, quick last question that I want to ask, because I really want to be respectful of your time as well, Peter. But I'd love to know: is there something where you've seen it be, or what's your most exciting thing that has been patent had an actual very good end use? Has there been anything like that, or something? If that's worded well, has there been something where you've really seen it and it's gone through to be patented and it's gone through to a real awesome end use application? Is it in healthcare? Has it been in other sectors that you've seen that you think that's it, watching it from initial idea being patented in a correct way to being delivering end results for a user taking a drug or whatever it might be?
I've because I'm not farmer, I've not been involved in the drug side, but I'll tell you one which is more in the engineering space, but it still applies. It was actually my now friend who met him on a skiing holiday. He said he hated patent attorneys. I said, well, you get the lawyer you deserve and you're a prat. And, and so it went on. And eventually came and he had a little black book full of ideas. And I went, crap. Oh, that one looks good. And it was using some particular fiber membrane to filter water.
Yeah.
And he went on to develop this thing called the Lifesaver bottle.
Yeah.
That then became the Lifesaver. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. That then became the Lifesaver jerry can and the Lifesaver cube.
Nice.
And then it became this thing called the Anyway spray, using the same sort of filter as a dip tube in Mr. Muscle type sprays and aerosols and so on.
Yeah.
And you see pictures of these things being deployed in disaster zones or in developing countries where there's been, hurricane or whatever, typhoon, and all the water's contaminated. This thing would clean up that water. You saw the British military using it in Afghanistan and Iraq, being dropped out the back of a Hercules by the Royal Air Force into areas where they needed to put in humanitarian support. And you see all that and think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
But I've got one company that I'm working with at the moment to do with personalized medicine, and it's all about speeding up your treatment so you get to the right drug dosage that you need, that you get the right digital therapy that goes with it. And they haven't launched yet because they're still dealing with the regulatory issues around regulatory approval for that kind of software. But it's an exciting time because you can see all the investors lining up. They see what they've got. They know they've got some really good patents sitting behind it that will help preserve the exclusivity for a while, and they'll develop their licensing and so on. And you look at that and go, I was there 5 years ago when they came in and drew some stuff on a whiteboard. And now we're pursuing US patent filing and prosecution strategies to land not 500,000, not a million, but tens and tens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment.
Yeah.
And the investors know it'll be years, still a few years before it gets out there. But and that's it. Kind of you're in it from the beginning if you work with these sorts of client types. And you've got to have a broader sense of perspective of what they're doing and how IP can help their business plan, not how IP can help you make a bit of money so I can go on a nice holiday.
Yeah. Well, it's like I said to you at the start. I don't know if we said it when we went live or beforehand, but I was just we work with startups like you do, and it's just so cool to see. I just love the idea of a new idea, like a new idea to come up with something new. To think,
I got one of these the other day. I'm really crap at taking notes. I've got to a time where I think my assistant will take notes, and I've got really scratchy writing on an iPad. And I bought one of these remarkable 2s, and now I'm taking notes for England. And one particular file set is this thing, innovation capture sessions, where we get people come in who describe their idea, the business that sits behind it, the fundraising they're trying to achieve, and they really just want to get a sense of what they've invented. And these meetings are cathartic, and I'm writing all these things, and we get a couple of those every week. New inventions from people who are genuine entrepreneurs, and they're on the foothills of that journey, and we get to be there from the very beginning and trying to unravel how to protect what they're doing. And the chap I mentioned earlier on, his next big thing is about wine and how to aerate wine. It's just fantastic to be involved with him, engaged again on his latest project.
Yeah, I always think about the industries, Peter, that exist that you don't think about, but they're so big. Like someone we know as a family friend, all they do is sell chairs and desks to schools. It's such a big business. Like that's all they do, and they just keep selling to schools, private or public. And there's someone else we knew that did, or someone I knew through them that did road signs. That's all they do. You just think these areas but probably have a wealth of problems and patents that need to be. I don't know. I'm not saying they do or don't, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do.
We work with people who want to, go in and. Particularly during, and we saw a huge number of innovations around COVID, protectors, protective gear, gear that allowed people to be anesthetized. And when they pull the thing out of their mouth at the end, not everybody gets infected because it throws, the research through it said it threw spray about 15 meters, all invisible aerosolized stuff. And, you work with these guys as they come through with those inventions. And it's interesting when you see pressures, whether it's economic pressures or otherwise, health pressures, economic pressures, people are always inventing.
Yeah, that's a great point.
They say death, taxes and innovation. People are always inventing. They sometimes, in the good times, they put their inventions in one way. In the bad times, they do it in a slightly different way, but they're always inventing.
Yeah, it's like saying if the world's just going to stop, it just wouldn't happen. We're too greedy. We want something more. We want more.
And you have to remember, of course, that the funds that exist, the venture capital funds in particular, they have to be spent. They can't sit there thinking we'll get a better rate of return putting it in NatWest. They have to spend it. So they're on a long-term thing. So if you're an entrepreneur, an innovator, there usually is some funding. In the UK, it's particularly good for startup funding. There is some gaps a bit later on in the funding, perhaps for some, but nevertheless,
love it.
It is there.
That's some brilliant points, Peter. I don't know. Have you got time just for one or two questions from the audience, or should we
I will. Yeah. I'm happy to do that.
It's great points. This is why I love doing it, because I learned so much. Like, this is an area that I haven't really spoke about in detail before. So we've got quite a few. I'm going to pick one or two out that have come through. So this is a general question from Fiona Law. She's put in, how good does the AI need to get, and this is from the start of the conversation, and I'll switch it around, but how good does the AI that we use need to get for us to trust it? I wonder. How do you think do you think there's like a confidence level or a level, or is it just it's a question of this is still, like, I see ethics. Everyone's like, oh, it's such a hot topic. I'm like, ethics should be a hot topic now and 100 years from now when I'm maybe gone from this planet. Like, it's always going to be there. What do you think?
Whenever I'm asked this sort of question, there's something I always worry about. I'm wearing my golf tops. None of my shirts seem to fit me anymore, but I play golf. If it says it's going to pour with rain on Saturday, I don't book a tee off time.
Yeah.
And the reason that I know it's going to rain on Saturday is because the weather forecast said it was going to rain. And that wasn't because somebody sat outside with a pine cone going, oh, I detect rain coming. It's an AI platform, machine learning, that's had huge data sets looking at various sensors and determining the path of weather and the conditions and how it's going to develop. Yeah. You trust it. You trust it because over a number of years, you know, apart from the famous example of the hurricane, you're too young for that, where they said, oh, don't worry, we've heard there's going to be a hurricane, but we know there's not. Half of England was destroyed. So there's an element of that. Now, when it comes to AI, there are methods that are being developed, formal methods, mathematical methods, and of course, there's that independent validation you can use on test data. So you can run, for example, a machine, and if it correlates with the real world, you give it fake old data, but without the answer, and it comes up with the right answer, then you start to get some degree of confidence. You can increase that confidence mathematically. There are techniques being developed in order to be able to demonstrate the behaviors of AI-based software so that regulators can be confident that it won't go out of bounds.
Yeah.
You know, when a doctor prescribes you pills, there is there's a protocol that's set down. It's called the label, and it actually tells you how to do it. You can't just give 500 milligrams as the first dose. The first dose has to be 200. It can never be more than 400 within the first 6 weeks. It's all set down. AI is capable of implementing those protocols, but I think it will require some of those techniques to be brought in to be able to validate it before it will get the sorts of approval that will allow it to run without clinical intervention. At the moment, there will generally be some form of clinical intervention. But as the clinicians themselves, because ultimately they, as much as the patients, need to be convinced. So it will get to a point where good enough is good enough, but there's no bright line test for it that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember I watched, given a load of good film recommendations here, but there's a series on Netflix called Explain, and it's my favorite series, I think, arguably, for that kind of topic. And there's one on hurricanes and how basically it is around all AI, and they're saying how they predict water shortages, or how they predict like the snowstorm that hit Austin, was it last year, or hit all of Texas, like how they were using that now for Miami and all of Florida. Like, they're very prone to being hit, and they can detect it, or like Haiti and all these places that are very prone to those kind of natural disasters. And they were like, but there's still an element where it could be wrong. They're like, it's still a potential factor, and it's such a head-spinning idea to mess with. It can be that accurate, but there's always something that can just think, no, not today. Mother Nature will do it.
Things like medical devices are classified medical class 1, class 2, class 3. A class 3 medical device is a highly regulated thing indeed. You know, you have to be able to have all sorts of quality control, prove its behavior. It's a highly regulated. Class 1 is a bit more about quality controls and things like that. It's not really there's very much, and so I think it might be possible to put things into buckets and say, this is one we can trust because the consequence of it being wrong is irrelevant. You know, a recommendation engine for a new car No one cares whether that's wrong.
Drill
here in his head. I want to know a bit more about that. And so you can classify them, and I think that's where the regulatory approvals are going to go. They'll look and see what the consequences of going out of bounds behaviour and things like that. And of course, from a patent point of view, there's loads of patenting opportunities to develop the techniques to make sure that you follow the behaviours that are expected, or be able to prove that you could follow the behaviours that are expected.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great point. A great point, Peter. So one more question that we've got is from Mike Nash. Do you think that with these AI bias cases being highlighted, which we were discussing earlier, Peter, that it may help highlight and correct human bias in society in future? Which is a good question, because I always look at it, where it comes from is, like, I always think it's derivative. Like, it's not the model making up these answers. It's been put in from a human. But what do you think?
Well, it's so fast. Driving back yesterday down the A12, and there was something on the radio about the value of art created by women,
right?
And how they had done various tests, one of which was to get AI to create the work, and then randomly select a name, whether a male name or a female name, and see what people thought the value was worth. And basically, female art was undervalued considerably over male art. And the AI helped to reveal that bias, because it could be unbiased in terms of it would just produce a work. It wasn't made by a man or a woman, but it could randomly allocate a gender to it. And then we humans exhibited our bias and demonstrated what people always thought all along, which is, you'll think this painting's worth more. So I thought that was a good example of how AI can reveal bias. Take it back to the more regulated world. I think it can highlight and correct human bias, but it can do the opposite as well, because there can be bias put into the training. So you do have to be careful. And that is the opportunities there. So if you are looking to develop a drug, getting enough people into the trial to be able to represent the population that it might be applied to, and in some countries there's quite a wide variation in the population, subpopulations, and they can have genetic differences that humans won't. Your average company might just go, here's 100 people, that turns out 80% of them are white. That's not good enough. AI, if you train it with a wide data and you make sure you build in these things, it can remove that bias and, as per the question, reveal that actually former approaches were indeed biased. We find that there is innovation in detecting that bias because there's a patentable solution. There's a subpopulation that need this particular dosage for this condition that would not be revealed from the general label of the drug or from the trials that were carried out. Bear in mind, these are randomized trials, not as random as you think. So I hope that doesn't really answer the question, but yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah, that's a good one. Because he also followed that up with another comment saying maybe there should be a different type of invention category that is AI created in brackets. This would foster innovation. So that's a good angle to maybe look at. I don't know. Is that even possible?
I think that has been suggested. I'm involved in the committee dealing with international sort of harmonization, and one of the things that came up is, let's say there's two inventions, one invented by artificial intelligence and one invented by a human. What standard do we apply when we assess whether that's patentable? And the way I think it's going to head is that the standard's going to be the same, which means that as AI improves, it will become harder to get protection because it will become more obvious. Because if you just have to put a few things into a computer, it tells you the answer. Where's the invention in that? That will become obvious. The trouble is that you won't get a patent just because you did it the old-fashioned way. We want a patent for this drug because we didn't use a computer to help us. That won't help you. If it's obvious that that drug would work and a computer would know that, that will become the new standard. So I think having AI inventions promoted will, I think, perhaps put some strain on the patentability of all inventions, because why would I give you a 20-year monopoly when my calculator around the back of my house could spit out the answer? That's not what we give patents for. And that might seem controversial, but it's about raising the bar. People think it's going to lower it. I think it will raise it over the longer term, because things will become harder to patent, because if a computer can figure it out with relative ease, got to prove that, by the way, then why would I give you a patent for doing it on the back of a piece of paper in your shed?
Doesn't make much sense. No. Where do you why should you own that patent just because you can turn something out at the back of your finger? It just, kind of takes the, what do you call it, like the trust away from it, or the reasoning for it. It's just anyone can pull it out, so it makes it,
You have to bear in mind a lot of innovations, I know, are effectively, you can consider them inevitable, and there's lots of evidence for that. You know, the light bulb and things like that. There wasn't just one person had a light bulb moment. There were lots of people working out the properties of metal when you apply electricity through it, in terms of it heating up and lighting and creating energy and emitting light. It was almost inevitable. There are very few inventions that are absolutely out of nowhere. No one ever thought of it. Lots of people are converging. It's a bit like an arms race. There's lots of people working on the same thing. Someone might get their first and final patent. With computers, I think you'll speed up the inevitability of certain inventions, definitely. Certainly the additive ones, where it's just an improvement over something that was an improvement. You know, think of a rubber tire these days. Well, when was the rubber tire first invented? But they're still filing patents on rubber tires, I can tell you that.
Still going for it, because they've got different. I went to, it reminds me, because I went to Continental office in down in France, and they were showing us like all the new ideas, and they were like, with this we need to configure the cars, we need to configure the tires, and they're like, tires is our main business, but because they're trying to do so much with autonomous driving and smart cars and smart vehicles, they're like, the wheels need to change, and the body of the wheels and the structure and how tires fit onto different wheels and how they fit onto Audis, for example. They're like, it's all,
and the application of braking force.
Exactly.
You know, detecting, those sort of, there was, I can't remember which century, it would have been probably around the beginning of the 20th century or maybe sometime in the 19th century. Somebody said, man, old term, of course, man has invented everything they're ever going to invent.
Yeah. It's already here.
And to be honest, when I was flying, people said it won't be long before we have everything's autonomous, and there's still humans sitting there on these £100 million jets.
Yeah. Well, isn't Emirates where the pilots have to take it off and land it just to make sure that they're trained well enough, because obviously the planes now can take off and land themselves. And they're like, it's part of their training.
If you're a commercial pilot, they like the automatic landing system because it gives a consistent landing.
Yeah.
There used to be a thing when I flew, it's called a carrier landing. So if you landed in the wet, you wanted to hit the ground hard, so you broke the surface tension on the runway, and it's called a carrier landing because everybody lands on a carrier knows you have to hit the deck hard. And but you don't want that on your average British Airways flight, because I do sit there and think, oh crikey, that was a real one. That wasn't the software gently lowering it on. Somebody slapped that on quite hard. They do have to do it because ultimately, you know, I talked about this regulatory thing. You can only use that software if the crosswinds are within limits. If they're out of limits, you can't use it because the computer can't react fast enough, or it will overreact and overcompensate. It can only work within certain things. And a human at that level, you know, there was this guy sat at the end of the runway at terminal in Heathrow in the storms a couple of months ago. He had millions of people watching these aircraft coming into land as they come in. They were not landing on autopilot. Absolutely not. Out of bounds, out of the limits, can't land in those conditions on auto. But that's exactly what they do. And they do have to train for the hard ones. Yeah.
Have you ever seen it then? That's made me think, Peter. Have you ever seen it where, is it it's the tubes, right? Where they've done the DLR, so that's all autonomous. And then there was like I don't know how long ago, and this isn't 100% accurate. I think I was hearing from my brother who lives down there. They were like making a petition to see if they could turn all of the tube lines, like the Jubilee, whatever they are, the Northern Line, the Victoria Line, and like proposing the idea of saying, would make it autonomous. And it was just like, well, you'd have massive sorts of tube strikes, like all the infrastructure would disappear. Yeah. So they were like, you need to provide those jobs. Like you can't, the technology is there to automate it. Is it on the Jubilee where they brought in the protecting doors and everything, so you can't actually get in front of the train until it's parked, which I think is a great idea. But do you see that with technologies or with any kind of industry you're involved in where it's possible, but because of certain regulation, it just wouldn't ever become a thing? So I can't see the tubes all turning autonomous. I don't know.
Well, I think they will eventually. Once you can guarantee that, it's a bit like, you know, autonomous cars is the number of issues around safety, insurance, indemnification, and so on. You know, these are the lots and lots of legal issues. And you read about things that go wrong. Well, it's inevitable they're going to go wrong, but I think it's also inevitable that eventually they'll be adopted and accepted. And it's difficult to believe that things like the tube wouldn't go that way. But you're talking about the societal pressures of introducing this sorts of technology that deprives people of jobs,
Really?
whilst perhaps giving them jobs elsewhere, but a different skill set. That's a very big and thorny issue. I haven't seen it. Yeah. I've seen it in a way the other way around, is that instead of having to have a startup employing 20 people and require seed money of a few million to get into the game, is that a couple of people with a decent computer and a WeWork office can now innovate Google, because they've got access to technology. They're not constrained by corporate think and group mindset, and they invent. I meet them every week. Those sorts of people that are not constrained and can use technology to get to innovation quicker and more quickly.
That's awesome, Peter. Because it was Elon Musk that says, "Don't go to university and get everything for free now online." Like, you get the same sort of information available for free, which I think is a great point.
My children are watching.
I think you should go to university. I think it's a lifestyle choice, and if I didn't go, I wouldn't have met some friends I have as dear friends for life now, and I think it's a very good way of growing up. But that's my viewpoint. But one more question, if you can, Peter. I know we're really out of time here, but it's a great question. I'd love your viewpoint on. What do you think the concept of explainable AI, or what do you think the concept of explainable AI will affect the models and patent world?
I've heard that expression, explainable AI, but I don't want to risk getting the answer completely wrong, going off topic. If explainable AI means that you're able to explain how it works, the weights that are applied, effectively the underlying algorithms that have been developed.
So
I think
quickly, it's a set of processes. I talk about it all the time, but make sure I've got a definition here. Is a set of processes and methods that allow human users to comprehend and trust the results and output created by machine learning algorithms.
Yeah, well, and clients I'm working with are looking at formal methods to be able to do just that, mathematical methods that can, what impact will it have? I think it will speed up adoption in areas where there would otherwise be mistrust, and therefore speed up it being applied. And that's particularly true in the regulated environments to do with health, but any mission critical stuff, think commercial airlines, for example, energy. If you get explainable AI, then I think it's really to do with adoption. I'm not sure it's to do with IP, which is where I was going with my first part of the answer. Is one of the problems with writing patents on AI, but when it's computer implemented, AI implemented rather than assisted, where you don't really care how it did it, is you have to explain how it works. You have to say, if you can't explain how it works, you have to say how it was trained.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of data to put into a patent application. It makes them stupidly expensive. And you do often just get to the point where you go, I can't be bothered. But if it's easier to understand the way the AI works, so that you can describe that in a patent application without hundreds of pages of information about data and algorithms and so on, that might help it. So I'm not sure it'll affect it directly, but I think indirectly it'll increase adoption. And I see the barriers at the moment in clinical environments where the world's waiting for personalized medicine. It's waiting for these sorts of digital therapeutics. And at the moment, if a clinician's not involved in the loop, so it's an open loop system rather than a closed loop system where the machine is monitoring and making the updates, then it's not regulated.
Yeah.
And that means it's not going to get adopted. Yeah. And companies going out there looking for money, it's one thing for a pharma company to say, we're going to invest in this and we'll launch in 12 years' time. Yeah. You can't go to venture capital and say, I've got this idea. You don't mind waiting 10 years, do you? Well, the regulatory environment develops to a point where they'll accept my innovation. No, I don't think so.
That's a great point.
I'm not sure I really answered that question as well as somebody better than me would have done, but that's my take.
No, that's a good take. All takes are good. It's good to understand where you come from and what you've seen happen and what you've seen work. And it's some great answers to everything today, Peter. So I really appreciate it. And massive thank you for joining us today. I think that's a great place to leave it. And I'm looking forward to doing this again, Peter. We've got to do this again, and hopefully in person or something, because I feel like I could just keep chatting to you about this topic for hours and hours.
I think if you and I met in a pub, we'd still be there.
We go to early doors. We start at 12, finish as soon as they shut. But I love it, man. It's
really my pleasure, Tom. And thanks for everybody for taking the time out of their busy days to listen in.
Yeah, we've got loads of people commenting. They're still going, and people coming in from all different areas. So looking forward to. You can have a look at the comments afterwards, Peter, on the LinkedIn.
I deliberately didn't have them there in case it was saying this man's an idiot.
Never, no, we never had that. We never will have that. But no, thanks again, Peter, and I'm looking forward to that.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye, Tom.